Greetings, brothers and sisters. So I made a video the other day. It had Jimmy Kimmel's in it and a little bit on Joe Biden talking to civil rights leaders. And it got demonetized because of the Jimmy Kimmel thing. It's not important. I don't need to go into that. But I'm going to take the Joe Biden piece and add it to this video because, I went back and watched more of his exchange here. And, it's just the lies, right? Because there is so much branding in life right now with people who are celebrities. And, sometimes politicians, celebrities lose control of their brand. Like they work real hard to build a brand and be known as a certain person. And then they do something stupid or some information comes out and it, wrecks their brand. And that is, a great thing because it's the truth emerging. And we live in a time where the truth is emerging. I mean, whether people really understand that or not, that when all this plays out that we're seeing right now, the collapse of our system, all the things that were, they're fundamental systemic lies, right? They're things that are, fundamentally untrue, but they're pushed over and over again. They're said over and over again, forced down people's throats to where people believe them, even though they're obviously not true. And so with Joe Biden, his candidacy, one of the big aspects of his candidacy was that he was somehow a champion of African American people. And they saved his candidacy in South Carolina. You guys remember that. He had, he came in 4th and 5th in Iowa and New Hampshire. And, he was a guy that was a failed presidential candidate 3 times. A gaffe magnet, somebody who was, glomming, sniffling, snoozling, groping women and things. And he was just, kind of a screw up, right? Everyone knew him as a screw up. No one thought of him as a president. He was a good vice president, an Ed McMahon to Obama's Johnny Carson, right? A sidekick. But for some reason they decided to run him, maybe because of, dementia and they could control him, or because he was, they already had built up his brand or whatever it is, so they tried to rebrand him as a, presidential candidate. You guys probably remember this, and he did poorly. The Democrats didn't even like him, right? He had 20%, 15 to 20% support in the Democratic Party, even with all the, he was the most famous candidate and he had the most money behind him. He had the most establishment behind him. And they couldn't get him above 20%, right? And he wasn't, And so in South Carolina, Clyburn saved him. It was support of the black community there that helped him win a primary. And then, they rigged it for him after that. And so he didn't deserve to win, right, all along the line. But they pushed this idea that he was a champion of African American people. And then when you watch this video, the way he talks, and he's always talking down to people. Like when he gets triggered, when anybody questions him, and this is, some signs of dementia, like, he gets angry and he, unloads with this hostility and he talks down to people like he's talking to them like they're children. And I've noticed when he's talking to African American people, it's even more so. Like you can see that he thinks he's superior to them. And so, I'm going to go through and document some more exchanges here. But this is an hour and 40-minute video. And, there's Kamala's there. She says next to nothing. And then there's 8 other people there. So there's 9 people in JoJo. And JoJo talks for more than half the time. And it's about their support. Like this was supposed to be them. Like after he, won the election, allegedly. After he won the election, this is on December 8th, 2020, after the election, they were telling him what they expected for their support. They were saying to him, this is what we want you to do. And JoJo's like, look here, like, Jack, right? I'll tell you what I'll tell you what I'm going to do and what I've done already. You should be grateful for me. I mean, this is his attitude throughout. So let's pick up here. And I'm going to go through and just randomly show you some things because it's all along, when he's talking. So let's start off here. There's one section I definitely want to get to. Hopefully I can find it. But again, this is him. he's going on. He takes the mic around 40 minutes over an hour in. He already talked a lot before, but then for 40 minutes he's just yelling like, "Get off my lawn," to kids. Like he's treating these people like they're kids.
I don't carry around a stamp on my head saying progressive and I'm AOC, but I have more of a record of getting things done in the United States Congress than anybody you know. Anybody you know.
He often does that where he repeats himself, right? Anybody you know, Jack. Anybody you know. Like, it's something, and I've talked about this before, when you tell lies, like when there's branding and it's all lies, people are trying to make themselves be good people when they're not, right? That's what branding is. They're not good people, right? No one's honest about what they really feel and think inside. There's an incongruity to what they are inside and out, right? People say to me like, "Oh, Paul, you're mocking people. That's not being spiritual," or whatever. Because I talk about spirituality, and they say, you have these character qualities and things. Yeah, but that's what's inside of me. Do you understand that? Should I just pretend? Like there's, these spiritual. You go to India, and I mean this isn't globally, but you'll see these gurus, and they wear certain kind of robes, and they look and they try to get a glow working, some sort of a glow, and they talk in a certain tone of voice, and they're acting spiritual. They're not. What's inside of them is something different, right? You see this with preachers, people who are preaching things, and then you find out they have these horrible lives, right? They're not, they're what they show everybody when they're on the pulpit or when they're in front of the congregation, and they talk about God and they do these things, and later on you find they got heads in the refrigerators or something, right? People have a public persona, and that's an act, and then when somebody's honest about who they are, people go like, "Why are you acting like that?" Well, because that's what's inside of me. Like the first part that needs to happen is people have to be honest about what's inside of them, right? They have to and be honest to themselves, because you have thoughts, you have whatever kind of thoughts that you wouldn't share with the public, you wouldn't share with other people, but you should at least be honest with what those thoughts are, right? You have those things inside of you, and be honest with what those things are, right? And, of course, politicians, that would never be the case. And so JoJo, I mean, he has all this hostility and anger, and, there's a superiority to him. Like he's a complete bozo, and he, probably insecure about being a screw up his whole life. Like Hunter Biden level screw up. I mean, you think about Hunter Biden, but JoJo is, the same kind of a guy, right? There's screw ups in a family, there's screw ups in politics, there's screw ups in Hollywood, right? There's screw ups in sports, and JoJo's one of them, but he's arrogant about himself, right? He thinks he's great.
I support same-day registration. I'm the guy that extended the Voting Rights Act for 25 years as a United States Senator. Before, Sherilyn, you were even involved.
See how aggressive and condescending he is, and he talks about himself and his record over and over again. You guys need to be grateful for me, and all these things. He's just really disrespectful, right? This is supposed to be and this is going out on, it's going out on the internet, right? This is why they hid JoJo during this whole campaign, because this isn't supposed to be him shouting like some old guy, "Get off my lawn," to a bunch of civil rights leaders that supported him. Like that wasn't what was supposed to happen. When they, prepped him, his team, his handlers were saying, "All right, JoJo, this is what this is about, and this is going to be seen." Again, the news media should have covered this. Like this is a guy who just got elected president, and he's shouting on one of the biggest he's shouting at one of the the leaders of one of the biggest demographics that helped him get whatever support that he got, right? And this wasn't supposed to happen. Like this is and if he's doing this now, what's going to happen in 4 years as he deteriorates more?
I got it. I started off, I'm much older than you. That's why I got involved in politics. The assault on the black vote and voting rights across the nation has never been more ugly than it is today. You got to go all the way back to the original Jim Crow to get where this guy is. If in case you haven't looked, we have the largest voting right, Kristen, my operation, 1,000 lawyers, bigger than you or anybody else out there on voting rights. 1,000 in this campaign. Not a joke.
And you see he's got his finger out, right? 1,000 lawyers. Like, what person is, he's got his finger out. He's bragging about his 1,000 lawyers. He's got lawyers. He's got 1,000 of them. Like, yeah, everyone loves a person who has 1,000 lawyers. Oh, you have 1,000 lawyers? Wow, you must be a wonderful person. You have 1,000 liars? Master Chargy of the Heartfulness System once said, lawyers are licensed liars, just like doctors are licensed killers, right? Which is kind of an extreme statement, but, true, right? And he's got his finger out bragging about his lawyers.
1,000. So I want you to know, I understand this. I know, look at the 38 cases that have been brought against my being president of the United States. All about phony actions. And so I think there should be same-day registration, automatic voting rights. I've been pushing, and I got a number of people that contribute significantly to the effort down in Florida to make sure that federal prisoners who serve their time have every single right restored to them. That's been my position before it was anybody else's position.
So he's talking about voting rights here, and like he's and he wants, one of the things is if you have a felony, you can't vote. And he wants that turned around. I mean, you have all these, and why is he saying that to this group of people, right? I mean, what is he saying? But, what is he implying by saying that to them? That prisoners voting would help the civil rights leaders. That's what he's saying to them.
I've been out pushing that. In addition to that, I think it's really important that no one goes to prison for a drug offense. Nobody. They go into rehabilitation.
So I'm in the editing process, and I have the an exchange with Kamala and Cory Booker when he was debating them about this, and then him firing pot smokers on his staff. So we'll come back to this later, but it's significant. Remember that he said this.
Rehabilitation. That's what we should be building, rehabilitation centers, not more prisons. I have a $20 billion effort that I'm proposing to get states to change their sentencing guidelines so that there is no more mandatory sentences across the board. In addition to that, we're talking about having diversity hiring in every agency. I promise you that is going to happen. We're just getting started here.
So, the way that the branding went, the way that the media branded, the way that the branding is in people's minds is that Republican is the party for white people, and the Democratic Party is the party of like a multicultural, progressive liberal group of people, right? And Joe Biden is a champion of civil rights, and Donald Trump is a racist. And so that's how they framed this election, right? And again, these are people that are owned. The politicians are owned by the same people. They're business people. There are, people with money and control that govern in the shadows, and they have control over all this. And, they have to break down these parties along, demographics that make it seem like you have a choice, like you're voting for your own interests based in what you are as a person. Superficial things like what you are, in terms of the color of your skin, what you are in terms of sex or, sexual identity or any of these types of things, right? That your group is being represented. You belong in a group. You're in some sort of group. And one of these two candidates is more, for your group than the other. But if you see the way he's talking to this group of people who is his supporters, right, about Trump, it's, on policy, yeah, maybe on some of these policies, he's more into civil rights than Trump, of course, because he's a Democrat. but it's very superficial. It has no real effect on, the life of most people and how he treats people and how arrogant he is. He talks about himself over and over again here.
The words of a president matter. What a president says matters. And you've never seen me shy away. In the middle of the debate, I called him a racist. In the middle of the debate with him, I took on white supremacists. I'm the guy that took on every single time somebody was threatened in this country. The only white boy you know who did it.
He's the only white boy you know who did it, right? He's just screaming at him. I mean, completely defensive and, just like, how you treat people matters, right? Words of a president matter, but how you talk to people. Look at the way he's talking to this group of people. And, regardless of what they are in terms of their demographic, he's yelling at them and telling them this is what reality is, right? Plus, what is he, Chet Hanks, right? Is this white boy summer? He sounds a lot like Chet Hanks.
Period. Out there. Every single time.
So everything about JoJo and the way his mind works or doesn't work, right? You can just see, the way that he perceives reality. Like when he gets challenged about stuff and he just says me, 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 me. He says the same things over and over again. He says over and over again, the words of a president matters. Like it's his constant mantra during this thing. And, talking about his record and all these things. He's not running for office in this debate here, and that's not a debate. It's supposed to be a sort of a victory moment, and talking about how he's going to support this community that helped him gain presidency, and he's just screaming and he's kind of unhinged here in different parts. And so I want to show one more segment here, and then put in the segment from yesterday's video that I had to take down. And so and it's just constant, his just attitude towards these people here. And then I want to show you from the debate with Kamala and Cory Booker. He had that gaffe moment, the same sort of a thing, and what kind of person he is based how he treats people. And then I want to talk about Kamala and the whole Mexico, the border with Mexico thing, because there's a funny headline for the New York Post about that.
I am not mincing my words when I speak about what I plan on doing as president of the United States.
So this is the segment he talks about women, right? He gets a little bit weird here, and it's two different segments, but here's the first part.
Making sure that we have diverse hiring, not only and for the main cabinet position and the sub-cabinet positions, but down the line. Down the line. It's going to make a big difference, and within the White House as well. Assistant to the president, there's only 6 of those slots. It matters. And by the way, I think you're going to see, I always kid Kamala by say this, but we're going to have more women than men.
You always kid Kamala that you're going to have more women than men, but that's just a joke, right? That's the first piece. And then he does this.
It's looking like now. Okay, that's good because I'm surrounded by women smarter than me, starting off with my wife and my sister. But all kidding aside.
Yeah, because a woman never could be smarter than me. Yeah, I'm surrounded by women who are smarter than me, starting off with my wife and my sister. But all kidding aside, we know that can't be true. That was a joke, you guys. A woman could be smarter than me, like that. He just says stupid stuff all the time. He's talking about how he is a feminist, and then he says, my wife and my sister are smarter than me. But all kidding aside, yeah. Right? And so, there's his political position, but then he exposed what he really believes.
This is going to be fully across the board. I'm going to keep the commitment that I said. And here's the thing. And Reverend Al, I think you're right about this. It matters what a president says.
Well, that's not, Al didn't say that, you did, and you said it 10 times. What a president says matters. It matters.
And if you notice, I am not mincing my words when I speak about what I plan on doing as President of the United States. We have to move them, move them. And one of the overwhelming reasons I won, by the way, is because we took on racism in suburbia. White women overwhelmingly voted with me, and black women were the two places where it was overwhelming.
Yeah, it's overwhelming, JoJo. I mean, just, listen to this MNF, right?
Because we spoke to those concerns. And Vanita, you know what I'm talking about. You and I have talked before.
Okay, so name me 3 things Vanita said to you, JoJo. What did Vanita say? Because I think, what you're saying is, you know what I'm talking about, Vanita. You listened to me before. Because I think there was a whole lot of shouting and mansplaining going on. So I want to get to the thing with Kamala, but first, I want to show you yesterday. I covered more of this yesterday. More shouting and more JoJo being triggered and defensive, right? We've seen him before. When he gets triggered and defensive, he challenges people to push-up contests. He calls them Jack. He called one guy fat, right? Some old guy. Another guy in some warehouse he got in his face was pointing at him, a woman who said, she just quoted somebody else when she was interviewing him, and he got angry and went off, right? So the guy is, this is what happens to people with dementia. They get aggressive and angry when they're challenged and they're overwhelmed. So here's this extended clip from yesterday. So this is another bizarre JoJo moment. This is him. It is December 8th, 2020, after the election. And he is meeting with civil rights leaders. In the first hour, they're doing most of the talking. And he is sitting there in the middle with the Alice Square of the Brady Bunch, right? Paul Lynn of the Hollywood Squares. And he is, in typical JoJo fashion, this is how he starts his part.
People in our community are getting a little anxious because they are not seeing enough of the progress they thought they would have seen at this point. Let's not disappoint them, and let's not get to a place where voters in Georgia begin to second guess.
Okay, let me respond. I've got to go. Let me respond. There's a lot to respond to here. Let's get something straight. You shouldn't be disappointed. What I've done so far is more than...
So he starts mansplaining, right? I mean, this is the guy who was supposed to be, the civil rights advocate. He starts to white mansplain this thing, right? Where he's saying, let's get something straight. You shouldn't feel the way you feel. You shouldn't feel disappointed. This is the JoJo that we all know and love, right? So let's listen to that again.
Voters in Georgia begin to second guess.
Okay, let me respond. I've got to go. Let me respond. There's a lot to respond to here. Let's get something straight.
Jack. Let's get something straight, Jack. Like, the Jack's implied. Like, sometimes he says it, sometimes he doesn't, but Jack is always there with JoJo.
You shouldn't be disappointed. What I've done so far is more than anybody else has done this far. Okay? Number one.
So he comes in completely defensive and, yelling. Like, this is his... He's angry and yelling and defensive.
Number two, I mean what I say when I say it. I mean what I say when I say it.
You mad, bro? Yeah, we don't believe you because you actually said that your family members were coal miners because you plagiarized somebody else's speech, and you've been a consistent lying politician your whole life, right? So this is how he comes in.
I'm the only person who's ever run on 3 platforms that I was told could not possibly win the election, and I never ceased from it. One was on restoring the soul of this country.
Yeah, that platform. No one was ever going to vote for that. Like, no one even knows what that means. The country doesn't have a soul. Like, what are you talking about? Like,
because of what I saw happen in Charlottesville. That was it. No one else was talking about it. The words of presidents matter. Nobody else, no progressive, was talking about it. I did. My son Bo used to have an expression. He'd say, remember, Dad, home base. It ain't worth the job if I can't say what I believe. I didn't want to run this time. I ran.
So yeah, he goes on this rant, right? He's quite angry. But then he drops something that's, completely counterproductive for him and, bizarre even for JoJo.
Say what I believe. I didn't want to run this time. I ran this time because of the racist son of a gun who was president of the United States of America. That's why I ran. And you'll remember, a lot of you told me talking about the soul of America was going over people's heads. They didn't know what we're talking about. The words of a president matter.
So yeah, he's going off here, and then this thing that he says, it's really bizarre. So I'm scrolling through and looking for the part that he drops a bombshell, but he's just yelling. So I've gone about 15 minutes into this thing. I have to, fast forward it. And he's just yelling the whole time.
On day one, I'm going to executive order to do this. Not within the constitutional authority. I am not going to violate the Constitution. Executive authority that my progressive friends talk about is...
He's like some old guys yelling at kids to get off his lawn, right? So this is where he says something, stunning for JoJo even, a stunning gaffe. And it has implications in so many different ways. And let me just play it, and then I'll analyze it.
Overarching objective. If we cannot make significant progress on racial equity, this country is doomed. It is doomed, not just because of African Americans, but because by 2040, this country is going to be minority white European. Hear me? Minority white European. And you guys are going to have to start working more with Hispanics, who make up a larger portion of the population than y'all do.
So let's think about what he just said here. I'm going to break this down. I'm going to play it again and go through it and dissect it. First of all, I want to say when it was sent to me on Instagram, the person who put it up on Instagram started where he said this country is doomed and didn't have the first part where he said if we don't address racial inequity, which changes the meaning of what JoJo said. It was edited in a bad way. And right-wing people and JoJo haters got to stop doing that, right? That's dishonest. Yeah, you have to play the clip in its context because it's bad what he said without doing stuff like that, right? People edit things to make it look worse, and they take things out. Well, then you're a liar piece of crap just like everybody else. You understand this? You're not a truther. You're not a person who's seeking truth. You're manipulating your audience. You're giving them false information.
Overarching objective. If we cannot make significant progress on racial equity, this country is doomed. It is doomed, not just because of African Americans.
It's hard to say exactly what JoJo's trying to say here. I think he's trying to say that the country's doomed not just because of the issues of racism with African Americans, but what he actually says is the country's doomed not just because of African Americans. And so that's how it comes out. And he's preachy and yelling and, disrespecting these people that are, his supporters, which is, I'll get more into that in just a moment.
On racial equity, this country is doomed. It is doomed, not just because of African Americans, but because by 2040, this country is going to be minority white European. Hear me?
Yeah, we hear you, JoJo, but do you hear yourself? So he said, this country's doomed not just because of African Americans, but because the white people are going to be the minority. So he's saying that the country's doomed because of African Americans, but not only that, white people won't be the majority anymore. That's what he just said, right? I don't think he meant that. I don't think JoJo, he just babbles, but that's what he said. And it's the tone and the way he's being disrespectful to the people that are there with him. Like he's, mansplaining, white mansplaining, telling them what's up, right? It's brutal.
Minority white European. And you guys are going to have to start working more with Hispanics, who make up a larger portion of the population than y'all do.
So that's just typical JoJo. So again, this is a demographic that he says he's grateful for and that supported him and saved him. And yet when they're coming to him with their, what they want from him as a politician for their support and, how he can represent them and the voters that are among this demographic that voted for him, he just yells for 40 minutes. And so this isn't the first time this has happened. Here's one of his epic gaffes from a debate during the primary. I mean, he had a lot of gaffes, but this is one of the doozies. So this is the debate when JoJo was the front runner. Again, he was only polling at between like 15 and 20%. Like he wasn't, killing it. But all these other candidates couldn't they weren't getting any kind of support. So Cory Booker goes after Joe Biden here. And Joe Biden has one of his epic gaffes that I've covered before.
Politicians is when people are looking for their vote. And they're worried because the Democratic Party, we don't want to see people miss this opportunity and lose because we are nominating someone that isn't trusted, doesn't have authentic connection.
He's talking about Joe Biden here, and he's talking about the African American community.
And so that's what's on the ballot, and issues do matter. I have a lot of respect for the vice president. He has sworn me into my office as a hero. This week I hear him literally say that I don't think we should legalize marijuana. I thought you might have been high when you said it. and let me
Look at JoJo, right? And so, by the way, JoJo's just fired. So JoJo, who has an admitted crackhead son. His son is a crackhead, right, which we all know. And he's been in and out of rehab at least 8 times. We know about Hunter. Everyone, I've covered him extensively. Biden White House asked staffers to resign over past marijuana use, report says. This is from Forbes. Biden White House admits firing staffers for marijuana, but still employs some past pot users. And so this is actually, playing out here. And we know that Kamala, she did things where, she was, rigging the, when she was district attorney, she withheld evidence and rigged court decisions for people in drug use, because this is a big part of the campaign, not criminalizing drug use, which he actually talked about in that, that other thing I just showed you. He talked about not criminalizing, getting people into rehab instead. And yet here he is, right, in the debate, and, his record says something different. Like he's, compassionate about his crackhead son, but fires people for smoking pot, right? And so this is, again, where his brand, what he wants to be and he proposes to be, isn't true.
Let me tell you, because marijuana in our country is already legal for privileged people. And the war on drugs has been a war on black and brown people. And so let me just say this.
Like your son, right? This is pure hypocrisy here because of his son being, such an avid fan of drug use.
With more African Americans under criminal supervision in America than all the slaves since 1850, do not roll up into communities and not talk directly to issues that are going to relate to the liberation of children.
JoJo wants to say something.
Because there are people in Congress right now that admit to smoking marijuana, while there are our kids are in jail right now for those drug crimes. And so these are the kind of issues that mean a lot to our community. And if we don't have somebody authentically, we lost the last election. Let me just give you this data example. We lost in Wisconsin because of a massive diminution, a lot of reasons, but there was a massive diminution in the African American vote. We need to have someone that can inspire, as Kamala said, to inspire African Americans to the polls at record numbers.
Thank you, Senator Booker. Vice President Biden.
So he is saying that JoJo can't do that he can't inspire African American community to vote for him, which ended up turning out not to be true because, like I said, they saved him in South Carolina, and they, he had, overwhelming support of this demographic in various places, which helped him, with this whole thing, the election. And so JoJo, who is, not going to stand for any of that because, like everything he talks about.
Biden, you can respond to that.
I'll be very brief. Number one, I think we should decriminalize marijuana, period. And I think.
But just fire staffers who smoke it, right? But let your son, have his crack pipe.
Anyone who has a record should be let out of jail. Their record's expunged. It be completely zeroed out. But I do think it makes sense, based on data, that we should study what the long-term effects are for the use of marijuana. That's all it is. Number one.
Yeah, those studies have already been done. Like we pretty much know what all these drugs and alcohol do to you. I mean, on a psychological level, on a physical level, and in terms of your ability to drive and function and all these things. I mean, people ignore it because they want to, but we know what drugs and alcohol do to people. I mean, people are drinking alcohol all the time, knowing what it does to you, like what it does to your liver, what it does to your judgment, what it does to you, the next day when you have a hangover or whatever it is, right? And it just and people eat Twinkies and they eat processed foods. All this information's out there, right? I've been talking about this with Demi Lovato.
Number one, everybody gets out, record expunged. Secondly, I'm part of that Obama coalition. I come out of the black community in terms of my support. If you notice, I have more people supporting me in the black community that have announced for me because they know me. They know who I am. 3 former chairs of the Black Caucus, the only African-American woman that ever been elected to the United States Senate, a whole range of.
So there was 2 African-American women. Of course, Kamala used to identify as, Asian because she's also Indian, right? She's Jamaican. Kamala is Jamaican and of Indian descent. Kamala is a common Indian name. And, doing the heartfulness system and being in India for some period of time, it's a very common Indian name. And so, this is his big gaffe. I've covered this before because he said the only African-American senator, and now Corey's like, what are you talking about? And then Kamala's going to get in here.
Of people.
No,
my point is
that's not true. The other one is here.
This is where he gets confused, right? I covered this, like, look at him. This is, over a year and a half ago. Like, this is JoJo being a bad debater. Like, he's just messed up and they're laughing at him. And when Cory Booker made I think he was high when he said it joke, they laughed at him, right? Like, he's just confused. There was a time where he just, turned around and started walking off stage, right?
I said the first.
And then he changes it and says, I said the first. I didn't say the only. And literally we have it on video. Like, this is why they didn't let this guy on the campaign trail. This is why they hid him away. Because now he's literally changing reality. Like, he talks about being honest. He said the only, but now he's let's just go back and show that again.
No,
my point is
that's not true. The other one is here.
I said the first. I said the first African-American elected. First African-American. So my point is.
And so he just changed it, right? He just I'm just going to change it. And Kamala's laughing at him. They're all laughing at him, right? But somehow, he got picked to be the next president. I mean, this is what happened. Like, this was, nobody, he didn't have enough support to get elected based in people liking him. It was, demonizing Trump and saying what a horrible person Trump is, right? When him and Trump have so many similarities in their character flaws. And so then there's this. Kamala, this is a great headline from New York Post. This is a great headline from the New York Post. Kamala isn't at the southern border, but migrant kids are getting Veep's book. There's a picture. It's a picture of her book on the table. And so there's these kids, right? There's kids by themselves who have come across the border. And this was something that they, hammered Trump about. And now it's a crisis. It's brutal down. Humanitarian crisis. And these kids are innocent. These kids have, and they're kids, right? And so Superheroes Are Everywhere by Kamala Harris. She's a superhero, and there's superheroes everywhere. And so just a crappy book. My Friend Within, a book that I've written, is a book where, God is inside of everybody and everything. It's a much better kids book. You can find it on in the description box. But anyways, she, like Joe Biden said, he was sending her down to the border. And remember, Kamala started to distance herself and not go there and, say that there's other people there that are in charge, right? There's other people, not just her. Like, she's distancing herself from this disaster because she knows that Biden has screwed her over. Like, he has completely, she's going to be held responsible. I mean, him sending her down there and her being, running that show down there, and there's no way to fix it. The crisis at the border. And the media's covered it a little bit, but it's going to come back up later on. It's a complete crisis. And she doesn't want any part of it. So she's distancing herself from it. But she's, giving these kids her book. Like, is there anything more self-serving than that? Vice President Kamala Harris hasn't been to the border to address a crisis she was tasked to fix. But a children's book she wrote is waiting there for young migrants who are being welcomed into the country. Unaccompanied migrant kids brought to the U.S.-Mexican border to a new shelter in Long Beach, California, will be given a copy of her 2019 children's book, Superheroes Are Everywhere, in their welcome kits. And so, here it is. Superheroes are everywhere. There's a kid with a cape and a broom and a girl with a cactus and a nerdy kid with with a Kindle or an iPad or something. And there's Kamala. She's just so cheery. Superheroes are everywhere, and there's stars and flags. And this is, I bet, a wonderful book. Heroes make you feel special. These images. Heroes are teachers. Heroes make a difference together. The Hero Code. See, like these books where, people who don't really interact with their kids or don't have kids and they become famous. And they're like, well, I want to write a book, but I'm not really a good writer. And so I'm going to write a kid's book, thinking kids' books are somehow easier to write. And they write crappy adult consciousness, adult level opinions kind of things and put them into kids' books. Don't make them kid friendly. It's like a whole thing. Kamala has no business writing a kid's book. And this is just hilarious. And so there's one more thing. My wife sent me this morning. A picture says 1,000 words. She's got the mask. She's got the shield. But smoking these death sticks. I mean, this is the non-player character, the NPCs, right? What we used to call sheeple. I mean, people who are completely clueless, right? Like we know this kills you, and we've known for years, right? This is really dangerous. This has killed way more people than probably COVID ever will. And so, and if you get COVID and you have damaged lungs from smoking, well, that's, then you're upping your risk of dying. But she's got this on and this on, right? And so, this is why all this stuff goes on, because of the NPCs and all the rest of it. So one of the things I like to do here in these videos is, I like to talk about simple things, simple truths that everybody knows about, that, at least on some level. You might not think about it. You might not. In most cases, you don't. But when you hear it, you're like, yeah, I know that, That makes sense. Things that people don't pay attention to. And if you look at everything that's going on and what I'm talking about here with Joe Biden and, all the things with the Republicans and the Democrats and the liberals and the conservatives, is that when things break down economically or, in a family or at a workplace, and you can trace this back historically, especially to selfish cultures where everybody's out for themselves. And you can even see this in the animal kingdom. When there's scarcity, a scarcity of water, say, like with animals, or scarcity of food. And in the case of what's happening, will be happening in America and the world globally, as the economy tumbles, a scarcity in terms of every aspect of your lifestyle, things that you are entitled to, you think you're entitled to, you're going to take a lifestyle hit. People break up into little groups. They find, whatever demographic they fit into. And they find ways and reasons to demonize the other group, to look at the other group as being at fault for whatever's going on negatively. And the more this, society, whatever system breaks down, the deeper the division and the hatred, right? I mean, when any country goes to war, you'll watch how they demonize the other country. And they'll say, how bad the people are there, and get their civilians or citizens riled up against that country so that they all think that they're fighting evil. And that's what you see now. You see this, like I said, even in work environments or family environments. I remember I was working this restaurant, and it was sort of by the shore. It was a summer restaurant that had a lot of outdoor dining. It was on a river, a place in Connecticut. And during the summer, you're making tons of money. And I saw this over and over again in restaurants. Where I worked, there would be a season. Restaurants usually have a season that they do particularly well in. Some restaurants are summer restaurants by the beach, by, outdoor locations that, in the winter, there's nobody there. There's nobody at the beach. There's nobody in that area. And then you have places that are more Christmassy, and, they have a lot of things that they do during the winter, and they have their season is in a different part of the year. But there's always, a downtime at restaurants, and I saw this over and over again. But this particular restaurant, I was friends with a couple of the waiters. They were a couple of brothers, and they were just, I don't know if they were in college or getting out of college, but everything started to dry up at the end of August. Starts getting cold in Connecticut. And, we were placed on the inside of the restaurant. We were going to make like zero money. And we were starting to get negative about the situation. And we were friends with the manager. She was a young woman who, single mom. And she particularly, we were friends with her more than other people because there was women that didn't like her, were judging her and things. And she pulled us into the office and was crying. I felt really bad because she was I'm just trying to take care of everyone. And it's slow now and whatever. And so, but we saw how people that we got along with during that period of time, we called ourselves the inner sanctum, we were joking, because there was, there was people on the outside deck who were getting all the tables and making all the money. And I think we had been on the inside a couple of times, right, where there was there was nobody there and the thing was drying up. But we had been friends with some of the other people, right? And if one of us had been put on the outside, it would have been you sell, there would have been some, friction there, right? I mean, some of the, I've told that story before where there was this guy who was a former college football player I worked with in New Mexico. And before that, he liked to, he was a big time camper, hiker, and somebody went out, lived in the woods for weeks at a time. And he did this job. And my roommate at the time, I was living in a shared house. And this guy he had a master, he had a degree, a PhD or something in psychology, and he did the same thing. And what they would do is they would take disturbed kids. And so the guy who was a college football player I worked with, he would take underprivileged kids. And the other guy would take wealthy kids, but kids who had been misbehaving, like Paris Hilton kind of, what the treatment center she was in. And they take them out into the wilderness, and, there's vast wilderness in the West. And they would camp out in these arroyos, these places that, water would flow through them when it rained, but they were usually pretty dry and, they were good against the wind and, flat surface to camp. And they would just have the kids out there for months, and they would just be out in nature. And somehow along the line, they would just become good kids again, right? They would leave their attitudes behind. They had to bond together to survive with the other people there. But this one guy was, he was taking these kids out to the wilderness, maybe somewhere in the South, this college football player guy, and he, one of his staff just didn't show. And the other guy was brand new, and he was out there 3 days with them and left. So he was one guy with 11 delinquent kids. And if you've ever worked in those environments, it's a nightmare. It can't even, if you haven't experienced that, you don't know, but you need backup, you need adults, you need staff with you. And I'm talking about treatment centers or lockup or anything like that. You need enough staff. And that's just if you have one shift where you're by yourself. Like I said, I used to have to run group therapy with 24 kids because we were short staffed as clinicians at these places. But to be out in the wilderness for weeks at a time where you're the only adult with like delinquent kids is a nightmare. And there was a couple of kids that started to be friends, like they were like really getting, chummy, and he could see that they were starting to bond together. Next thing though, he was going to have some sort of a, insurrection, right? Because the kids hate each other. That's the one thing, that these kids can't get along with other people, and they're all selfish, and a lot of them are sensitive, but really aggressive. Like so they're very sensitive to criticism, but they're brutal with other people. And so they really just can't get along. But these two kids were starting to bond, and he knew it was going to be a nightmare. So he gave a candy bar to one of them. The next thing you know, they were fighting because the other kid got jealous and all these things. It was like psychological warfare the guy had to engage in because he was in this situation where he had no staff, and he wasn't like they just dropped these, the kids out in the wilderness, and he had, he had to call up and say, look, I don't have any people to work. And so he was, there for some period of time. But, the overall point here is when there's scarcity and there is, people are worried about their lifestyle and how their needs are going to get met, they break up into little groups. And the people who control the system have a divide and conquer. I'm talking about the trillionaires, the queen, and, these, the people I call the controllers. The way that they keep the mob, because they're scared of the mob. Like anybody who's a leader should always be scared of the mob because the mob's irrational. And when they get triggered, they're like locusts. People turn into just violent. I mean, when there's mob riots and people are so angry and so like you're just, it's a condition they get into, and they just flip out and they don't care like what's fair. There's no rule of law. There's no due process. They just, go out and destroy anything that they think is the reason for their, anger, right? They just target somebody. So the people who run the world, this is, they know this, right? And they're scared of this. This is one of their biggest fears. And there seems to be a bigger fear right now because they seem to be like not, they're not trying to appease the mob, right? They're provoking both sides right now. The right and the left, and then the racial demographics. Everybody thinks they're being victimized, and they're triggered, and they're hating the other group. And this is going to grow. Like you can feel it. It's palpable by listening to either side, the right or the left, or any of these various every demographic right now, no matter what it is, thinks they're getting screwed over. You talk to anybody who identifies as one group or another, they think they're getting screwed over. And so, and they're cultivating that anger and hatred because there's going to be bad news coming around the corner, and in terms of your lifestyle and what life in the future is going to be like for people. And nobody's going to like what they hear. I mean, very few people will like what they hear. There'll be some, small percentage of people like, oh yeah, this will be better, even though it won't, right? In terms of material life. And what the British have done, it's not, their thing, but they've been the ones who sort of mastered it over the last 500 years, is to divide and conquer, to take various demographics in a country based in religious belief or based in race or ethnicity and pin those groups against each other. They did it when they left India and, leading up to leaving India by getting the Muslims and the Hindus to war with each other. And they had, there wasn't that animosity before then. But now you see it in Pakistan and India, which are both a part of the British Commonwealth, I believe, where they have, been at war now ever since the British left. And the way that they were fighting, the Muslims and the Hindus were fighting when the British left was, not like it was before, but they exacerbated the differences and the conflict between these groups. And that's something they're doing now in America. You see it. The media and everybody's pushing this division. Everybody sort of kind of can see this, but still gets triggered because when you start thinking about yourself in terms of a demographic and the way that everyone else is behaving, because each group is behaving badly, like being selfish and, not being truthful, right, about, everything. And, you see this even in the truth community. Like you have to be honest about you and your group. Like you should be honest with yourself about like, what kind of person you are. Like, like the selfish thoughts that you have. And, all the things that go on in your inner world, like I've talked about in the heartfulness system, just getting your inner world and your outer world to be congruent. Because you often have spiritual people who have good hearts, who have created a protective layer around their hearts and are, have some, hostile type of personality, but they have soft hearts. And then you have people who are completely hard on the inside. Their hearts are hard. They're disconnected from God, but they've put on a fake outward persona, and everyone thinks they're nice, but inside they're not, right? And so just getting people to be honest with what's inside of them, the good people being willing to open up and, risk being hurt and things so they can, open their inner world and share their, spiritual essence, right, with the world. And the people who are, hard and dark on the inside, but they put out a fake persona, a fake mask of nicety, right? And them, being honest with who they are and not deceiving people about what's inside of them, right? And so, and eventually, with the heartfulness meditation, it's to cleanse people's internal world and bring them to a deeper connection with God and be a pure reflection of who you are as a soul. Because your soul's essence is a lot better person than your ego is, like who you are right now is an ego. Like your ego isn't a pure reflection of your soul, but when your ego becomes a pure reflection of your soul and you become what God wants you to become, like your, ultimate expression of your divinity that's within you, then the world would be transformed. You'd have a world full of saints, which is something that desperately needs to happen. But before that, it's going to be, we're in the age of egoism and people's egos. And, that's going to, and there is a condition in the world of ego where people were willing to break everything, to destroy everything because they're unhappy, right? I saw a headline the other day that there was a murder-suicide where a guy killed his wife and children and then killed himself, right? Like, you feel bad, but why do you got to take them out, right? Why do you got to go scorched earth? Why can't you just, why would you bring other people into that activity? If you're not going to see your life through or whatever it is, that's your choice, but why are you going to bring down the people around you, your loved ones? And there's people like that are willing to destroy the world. There's lots of people, and there's, negative entities, negative spiritual entities out there that want to see this world, go into a complete annihilation type of, demonic, negative energy type of spiritual condition. And there's this movement for that, like the destruction of the planet and just to wreck everything. And that, that's a legitimate possibility of happening right now because people's egos and negativity, once in a while, like people get so angry and so hostile and they just want to take everything down. And then they go scorched earth and then they look around, they're like, wow, that was a mistake. Like they come to their senses, like they got into this evil state, right? And they, there's all this negative energy and hostility, and so they act on that evil state. And then they're afterwards like, well, I went a little too far. Well, yeah, it's too late, right? You burned down the planet, you burned down the house. And so, the need for people to be moderate in their thought and be, generous with the other groups and realize that this is not about, the worst thing can happen is that there's division. I've talked about this before. When people are fighting, you can see this in your life, in your work environment, and with your family. When there's conflict, all work stops. Like when you're working cooperatively with people, and the cooperation breaks down, then the group tasks break down, and you have all this drama. And people love drama, like these reality TV shows. And you see this with sports, right? When you listen to sports commentators, what happens is like they talk a little bit about the victory and how great the people are that won, and then they get more into the drama, either the drama with the team that won or more often the losing team, and it's all about drama. And they make things up or they exacerbate things because people are interested in drama. Like people wouldn't watch sports as much or certainly reality TV if there was no conflict or drama. And so right now it's, one of the things, it's the age of drama where people love drama. They create drama in their own lives. And so, and that becomes a blockage to their spiritual evolution and, accomplishing things in life. That's why you have, this sort of loser consciousness where people just want to get dramatic and in a time where the system props you up and you can still survive because the system does so much for you. Like it's, but if you have to function and survive yourself and you have to work in a communal type of situation, you have to work in a community, that it's something different. And I want to clarify something along those lines. I was talking about this a couple days ago, and I said, it wasn't clear when I listened to it, when I played it back, but I didn't feel like, my voice was tired and I didn't want to spend energy correcting it, but I want to talk about it here. I talked about how, like, if you are 75% self-sufficient, right? Let's say you're off the grid and you're only dependent on the system for 25%. That 25% is huge, because when you start being more self-sufficient, my family and I, we were learning to, homestead, like you make butter, you make, whatever it is, right? You make, like butter, for example, it's not that hard. You take some cream and you can just make butter. You can buy some whipping cream. Of course, you haven't milked your cow or anything like that, but, you can just learn to make butter, and let it get to a certain temperature, in the high 60s, like 68 degrees or whatever it is, and you start shaking it. After a while, it just turns to butter. It'll separate. There'll be this, this curds and whey, right? There'll be this whey, it's sort of a cloudy liquid, but it's clearer, a lot thinner than milk, and it's also called buttermilk, right? Interesting thing. For years, my family and I was milking cows. All the old timers, because there's all these old timers that grew up on farms, and they come to us and say, we need to have your buttermilk. Like, you guys, what are you doing with your buttermilk if we were making butter? So we take our, when you milk a cow, and, now milk, when you get it, is homogenized, right? And it is pasteurized, which means it's boiled. And the homogenization process is to make all the fat molecules to blend in, right? But when you milk a cow, all the cream rises to the top. My mom used to talk about getting milk in these glass jars delivered, and there'd be this cream just, seeping out of the top of the milk. And so you can shake it and blend it together, or you can take the cream off and turn it into, butter or whipped cream or whatever it is. And so we would take the cream and we would turn it into butter. And we gave this one guy, he said he wanted buttermilk, because all these kids, all these old people grew up when they were kids on buttermilk, and they all craved it when they got older, because it's, rich in various types of things, right? And buttermilk you get at a store isn't the same thing. It's not, it's not true buttermilk. And so this one guy, he asked for buttermilk, and this guy owned a diner and stuff. And, we gave him some of the butter that we were making. He said, well, that's not real buttermilk. He said, when you do the real buttermilk, you put the cream in the, butter churn. He gave us a butter churn, right? You put the cream in the butter churn, and you let it get cultured. You let it sour. And that's when you see cultured butter in stores. That's what that is. And what happens is it sort of goes, what people would think is bad, but it's turning into yogurt, something that's cultured. You can't do this with stuff that's been pasteurized and been, homogenized. You have to do it with raw products. And, most states ban the sale of raw milk because it's a living food. Like, it's got, when you boil it, you kill all the sort of the living aspect of the milk. And so you let it get cultured, and then you turn it into butter, and the buttermilk is cultured. It has a completely different taste, and it's rich in probiotics and all these things. Now, I just shared this information with you, and like maybe register with you and you have it. But there was all these experiences I went through, milking the cow and making butter, and then all these experiences with these old-timers realizing, like, they craved buttermilk, and they couldn't get it anywhere because nobody makes it like that anymore. And so, understanding that from an experiential, like, you have it in terms of mental knowledge, but I have it in terms of experience. And so what I was saying about the 25%, the 75%, is that it isn't that hard to make butter. But when you do all of these things, when you make butter, when you bring in hay and crops, and you shear your sheep, and you make wool, and you make, clothes, the more you do those things, the more it's just, overwhelming, right? And you can get good at all those things, but it's not natural. You didn't, it might be natural, but you didn't grow up with it. So it's all something you have to learn. And so 25%, because you're already doing 75%, and that's so much, like, just that 25% that you're relying on the system still is huge. Even though you're like, well, I'm 75% of the way, that 25% is, astronomical. Because even 10% is a lot. Let's say you're 90% self-sufficient. That 10%, because now you're doing so much, right? And that's the problem, is there's so much information lost. And if you didn't, like, grow up on it, you didn't see people doing it, you didn't, you weren't around people who knew all these things. You weren't, passed information from your grandparents and your parents and trained to all these things. It's a huge gap. And as the system collapses, the system we're 100% dependent on, and people are warring with other people over what's left, right, over the scraps of a dying system, and then people are starting to become self-sufficient, it's a huge leap to go from being 100% dependent on the beast, on the system, to being just 90%. That 10% of self-sufficiency is a lot. And this is what I'm saying, so it's a huge learning gap and learning curve. And so all these things, need to come together when people understand, you can survive. There's a homestead or a farmer in every person because it's there genetically. Your ancestors were there, and people in general have that in them. It's natural human behavior. But to relearn all these skills and much of the information lost, and do it when it's a post-apocalyptic period where it's harsher living conditions and people are flipping out, and people are are now aggressive and predatory and tribal in a negative way, where people are breaking up into groups and warring over resources. So it's this is a rough ride that people are going to once you see it, you'll be like, oh wow, this is this is a lot worse than I thought it was going to be. And so to get to that, phase where people are evolved spiritually and connected to God on a deeper level and exhibiting what's best inside of them, a pure expression of their soul, there's this negative period. And you see it right now. The people that control the system are, the way that they're manipulating the social interactions is to create to have no blame placed on them and the system they control. And, all of us have sharing the blame because it's a fundamental dishonesty it takes to live in the system we live in. We're just, oblivious to all the negative things that we're doing to the environment and each other and other countries, like what America does to other countries to sustain our lifestyle and our privileges, in terms of our military, in terms of a warped economic system, in terms of the dollar being the world's reserve currency and all these things. It's, completely warped in our favor, and none of us really care about it. Most people are complaining about how they're being screwed over. But if you look at what it's like to be an American as opposed to all these other countries that are being, having their resources in a neo-colonialistic type of way, right? The new colonialism where they're losing their resources and their lifestyle, the things that they need to live that are there in their country, and they're being shipped over to us, and they're getting paid almost nothing for those resources and their labor. And, they're making these products to be shipped over to, Walmart or whatever it is, right? But Americans all think they're being screwed. And so there's this fundamental dishonesty, and everyone's going to have to atone for that. Everyone's going to have to realize, what they are as a person and their attitudes and their entitlements that aren't, guaranteed by God, right? They're guaranteed by the man, by the beast, by the system, and the words of a liar, right? A system that lies, and the people that control the system that lies. Like JoJo saying, I mean what I say, and I say what I mean. Well, that's not true, right? You're a politician just because you say so. And so only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely reporting from the Apocalaughs and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.